Hello everybody! As you may know, I'm a socialist and I make videos about historical and political topics from a leftist point of view. So, as you would expect, I get a lot of anti-socialist arguments in my comments and DMs. For a lot of them, like the Holodomor, I already have a video I can just link them to. But possibly the greatest anti-socialist argument I have not yet responded to is the question, hey, why was it that during the Cold War the West was richer than the East if communism is so great? And of course, as you can tell by the length of this video, this question takes some time to answer. I'm not going to assume it is a troll question. I will treat it as if it was entirely 100% good faith. And I will try to explore the historical and political reasons why it all turned out that way. My goal is not to defend state socialist countries, they weren't exactly utopias, but to gain an understanding of historical events. I do this every week on my channel, so if you want to see more videos like this, make sure to like and subscribe, and maybe even donate on Patreon if you pity me enough. And also check out my second channel, Wiki2000, to join a stream in which I go through this video and give you all of the extra information I had to cut for time. The script was 10 minutes longer in the first draft. Now, of course, we have a major issue here, and that is the fact that comparing the state socialist countries of the Cold War to the liberal capitalist democracies is pretty hard to do. Of course, comparing all socialist states and all capitalist states would be the obvious approach to this question. But because the Eastern Bloc and Western Europe had such drastically different economic development going back all the way to the Industrial Revolution, that comparison would be hardly fair. Likewise, comparing the USA and USSR during the Cold War is not fair because Russia industrialized in 1940 and the USA did it 80 years earlier. And also the USSR was destroyed by a world war, a civil war, and another world war. So yeah, the USSR was worse than the USA. But there is one comparison of socialism and capitalism that is commonly used: Germany. Famously, after the war, Germany was split between a capitalist West Germany and a communist East Germany. This seems like a super fair comparison. After all, you have the same people with the same religion and values and immediate history in two different countries, and the only difference is the economic system and the political system, but nobody ever considers that. This must surely be the perfect way to empirically compare socialism and capitalism in a modern European economy, right? Well, that is what this video is about, exploring how fair this comparison is, as well as making the comparison. Of course, we need to know a bit about Germany before the war that split it. Germany was this big and it industrialized in the 1860s. Most industry was here. Three major reasons. First, this region had many people who could work. Second, it had a fuckload of coal and iron, both needed for early industry, and it had the Rhine, which allowed for easy transport of massive amounts of resources. So, German industry was focused around this area, which is called the Rhineland. The rest of Germany was mostly agrarian land that supported the industrialized Rhineland. As you know, the Kaiser started a war, then lost a war, then there was a democracy, then fascism, then another war, and then Germany lost. After which, Germany was split 4 ways. Parts were given to Poland, the USSR, and there were 2 new German republics formed, namely East Germany and West Germany. The industry in the western parts of Germany had been destroyed by years of Allied bombing campaigns, and the industry in what now was East Germany was straight up looted by the USSR, which took the little industrial machinery that there was as war reparations, since Germany kind of invaded them. Eventually, by 1948, there were 2 German republics. The East German one formed along democratic centralism and a state socialist economy, and the West German one formed around liberal capitalist democracy. A notable difference between the 2 Germanys was that West Germany was a lot larger than East Germany, which is sort of obvious if you ever look at the map. But the same is true for population. As a matter of fact, the West had 5 times the population of the East. After the war, the two economies developed very differently. Initially, the West had big trouble getting its industry started again. But they had a well-educated working class, from the big industry in the Ruhr that they had before the war. And when America injected lots of money using the Marshall Plan, the West German economy recovered remarkably quickly. This is oftentimes called the Wirtschaftswunder, or economic miracle. Did the same happen in the East? No. And why not? Well, because the east of Germany didn't really have the educated workers needed for rapid economic development. As I explained before, Germany outside of the Rhineland was mostly farmland. In the West, all those companies and capitalists that worked with the Nazi government and had used slave labor for profit during the war faced exactly no consequences. They were all still around and all using the money they made during the war to expand their businesses. These were companies like Krupp, Audi, Volkswagen, IG Farben, Nestle, Porsche, Siemens, the Deutsche Bank, and so many more that there is a Wikipedia article about it. In the East, on the other hand, the few private companies were seized by the state. The same was also true for the so-called Junkers, who were practically feudal landlords. Their land was redistributed to people who used to be landless peasants. The East German Politburo quickly decided that an agrarian economy like they were faced with was not ideal. You see, farmers make money, but they only make so much, and the wages of farmers typically don't rise with time. On the other hand, if you have factory workers, they make more money, and as the economy and technology advance, they make even more. And they spend it on the products, which grows the factories that supply the products, opening even more industrial jobs, increasing the total wealth of the society. But what do you need to fund industry? Well, two things. A lot of money and unemployed educated people. And while West Germany had many educated people and got money from the Marshall Plan, the East had a harder time. They would have to educate people before they could start up their heavy industry. So East Germany offered its people very good schools and universities. And like all good communists, they made it entirely free. But East Germany had very little money. It was not part of the Marshall Plan. And all profits the state made from the collectivized farms was paid to the USSR as reparations for the World War. There was Comecon, but that made no difference. So East Germany had a lot of really well-educated people, but not yet any high-paid jobs for them. But do you know who had lots of well-paying job openings? The quickly developing West Germany. So a very large amount of people who were educated by the East German state for free went to the West and worked there, and made money there, and paid taxes there, and advanced economic development there. This led to the West German industry, which was already way larger before, growing quicker, which caused rising living standards, which attracted even more East Germans to go to the West. This was, of course, a really big problem for the East. Everyone able to work just left the country, so the government had no chance to economically catch up to the West. Eventually, in 1961, the East German government erected the Berlin Wall, a, let's say, controversial move. It managed to stop the brain drain, and the East German economy would definitely profit from the travel ban, but from a humanitarian point of view, the wall was horrible. As time went on, West Germany followed Keynesian economic policy and formed things like universal healthcare and minimum wages. Things East Germany had established way earlier, but it still warrants a mention because nowadays you wouldn't see a capitalist nation compromise like that. By the 70s, East Germany began to add a little more focus on quality of life for its citizens. They would build lots of housing for everyone, and rent was heavily subsidized. And because women worked just as much as men did, the state provided daycare for children and very generous maternity leave, up to 12 months. And shockingly, yes, women were paid the same as men in East Germany. Unimaginable in our capitalist economies, I know. Eventually, by the mid-80s, along with the development of computers, the East German economy had the same issue as many socialist nations. Their technology was hopelessly outdated. They still produced the same car they produced in the mid-60s. The logic was that making a new car every 3 years, like capitalists would do, would be a massive waste of resources. So the Central Planning Organization didn't see producing new cars as a priority. The same was true for computers and consumer products, which gave the East the reputation of being behind the West. It has to be admitted that the free market is really good at producing many different products. A lot of the time they're almost the same product as well. There are 20 brands of cereal, which no central planning organization will agree with. But of course, from the view of the central government in East Germany, a capitalist economy was tremendously wasteful of labor and raw materials. Why have 20 companies make coffee if one would do? The same inefficiency is why our modern day current economy produces food for 10 billion people, but only reliably feeds 7 billion. It's because capitalist markets suffer from overproduction. The East German economy also had its perks: free education and healthcare, extremely affordable food and living spaces. A lot of states sponsored holiday options, a pretty good minimum wage relative to consumer product prices, and of course a 0% unemployment rate and 0% homeless people. This was because to the government in the East, it was more important that everyone has a job rather than that every factory is 100% efficient. The logic was that being given a pointless job would still be better than being unemployed and hungry. Revolutionary idea. Also, curiously, while East Germany's economy was consistently smaller than the West German, in pretty much all metrics, the East German economy had a larger GDP growth for its entire existence. A lot more about the comparison of the West and the East will follow after we discuss the reunification of Germany. Of course, by the mid-80s, the socialist world began unraveling. The Bolshevik Party had selected Gorbachev as General Secretary of the USSR, and he decided to reform the state socialist system towards a hybrid system that allowed some market features to improve standards of living. At the time, nobody had tried that, but China would do it very successfully a few decades later. The entire collapse of the Eastern Bloc is very complicated, and I have a 30-minute video on it. For the sake of time, and because I don't like repeating myself, I will cut this section painfully short. Gorbachev said that the Eastern Bloc was free to determine its own future, so Poland elected a non-socialist government and Hungary selected anti-communists to run the government. This caused protests all over the Eastern Bloc, like in East Germany, which at the time was led by a hardliner named Honecker. The people in East Germany kept protesting every Monday. Despite not controlling any of the media, the protests grew in size over time. 8,000, 8,000, 10,000. It was a massive movement, and Honecker decided to order the militia and the Stasi to kill them all. The soldiers and Stasi refused their orders, and the Politburo removed him from his position, presumably to avert a German Tiananmen Square. The new guy decided to open the border with the West. The plan was to make a complicated system of visas that allowed temporarily visiting the West, which would take weeks to process. But the guy holding the press briefing didn't know that, so he said that people could go to the West now. So they did. Despite having orders to shoot, the soldiers at the checkpoint didn't really have the ammunition nor the will to kill tens of thousands of people that flooded the border crossings. So they just let them through. Then East Germany held a democratic election, and the so-called Alliance for Germany was the largest minority, so they were in charge. Eventually, 2 years later, Germany would be unified again. Along with the annexation of East Germany, there were a lot of new freedoms. For example, a multi-party system, freedoms to protest and freedom of speech, all of which were definitely nice changes for the citizen of what was now the eastern provinces of West Germany. Of course, after the annexation of the East, the former Western government had a big challenge to deal with. In the former Eastern German provinces, almost all businesses belonged to the state, as state socialist nations tend to do. But the new united German government couldn't have communism like that. So they decided on a plan to change the East German economy to a modern capitalist one in a short period of time. All businesses would be given to a Treuhand, which means something like a trust, and that trust was tasked with privatizing all these businesses and factories that used to belong to the East German government. Anyone with a few 100,000 could buy an East German business with hundreds of workers. The issue was that nobody in the East had a few 100,000. So all these East German businesses were sold to West Germans and Americans. This was seen as very unjust by the workers in the East. Basically, in the state socialist economy, all money that businesses made and all taxes people paid was taken by the state and then used to build new state-owned factories. And now those factories were sold to capitalists, and East Germany didn't see a cent. Because of the rapid privatization and change from an economy focused on providing jobs to an economy focused on providing profit, most East German businesses were outcompeted by the global capitalist market. The lucky ones were made into subsidiaries of Western companies, but many just collapsed, which resulted in an unemployment rate of 20%. And of course, with the privatization of social housing in the East, rent shot through the roof. On top of that, the German government established a lower minimum wage in the East, which is still in place until today. Because of the lower income, the East Germans could not afford the consumer products that are now sold in the East. So they abandoned communism to get capitalist consumer products, which now they can't afford because they live in capitalism. So all of these things were problems. The rampant unemployment, the collapse of most businesses, the foreign capitalists taking all industry, the sky-high rent, the lower wages, the lack of improvement of quality of life, and so much more. It made the East Germans react in one of three ways. Many of them, especially the younger ones, moved to the West to find work there. So again, East Germany could not develop its industry because all capable workers are leaving towards the West, like they did before the wall. And this causes frustration within those who stayed in the East. Many people said that living in the East was better than their current lives. Whether this is true or just a case of the good old days is impossible to know. But we know what these people used to vent their frustration: voting. They vote for the far-right proto-fascist AfD and, surprisingly, for the far-left Linke as well. Both of these parties get most of their voters in the East. Suffering causes radical politics in both directions, apparently. Okay, maybe that is why the East is poorer now. But why was it poorer than the West during the Cold War? Well, East Germany had barely any resources that could be transformed into consumer products, or even just provide a well-paying job for workers. On top of that, East Germany had 1/5 of the population of the West. There were not enough people to do industrial jobs to raise the GDP. Another major factor was the Marshall Plan enacted by the USA after the war. This basically kick-started the West German economy. It created factories that provided jobs so the workers could buy products that paid for more factories. The East had nothing like that. As a matter of fact, the East was suffering from all well-educated people leaving. This lasted until they built the wall, and started again the year the wall went down. This is not to say I defend borders without crossing points defended by a shoot-on-sight order, but we have to recognize what the wall did for the East economically. Of course, by the mid-80s, East Germany was notably behind the West in consumer products, the quality of products they had, and on digitalization. I would ascribe these issues to the centrally planned economy. The economic planners didn't want to, for example, make a new car. The Trabant was very much outdated by the mid-80s, but the Central Planning Organization thought it was good enough for everyday use, so East Germans drove 50-year-old cars. I'm using cars as an example, but the same was really true for all consumer products. In the 50s and 60s, East German consumer products were equal to Western ones, but capitalism made more products that people can use, and that gives the appearance of a better economy. And here's another major, crucial point that I would like you to consider. A huge amount of the wealth in West Germany and the capitalist world in general was based on the exploitation of the global South. The reason the West had cheaper clothing was because poor farmers in the Third World were slaving away for barely a penny. The Eastern Bloc had no access to cheap raw material from Africa and Asia because they only traded with socialist nations who happened to install minimum wages. Even today, a large part of why our living standards are so high is because of exploitation in other countries. the lithium and cobalt in your phone and PC were mined by slaves in Africa and South America. Your cheap clothing was made by someone in a sweatshop making 50 cents a day. That's the only reason it's so cheap, not because markets magically make stuff cheap. Capitalism appears more wealthy if you only focus on the first world, which riches are born from the exploitation of foreigners in other capitalist nations. In the socialist world, there were no cheap products because the workers in Chile and Angola were treated as well as those in Germany. You can't say that for the capitalist world. So yeah, there were a multitude of factors contributing to East Germany being worse off. Population size, previous industry, lack of capital, a brain drain, and more. None of which can fairly be attributed to the nature of socialism. The only one that can truly be blamed on socialism is the fact that East Germany didn't mercilessly exploit poor countries for cheap imports. Thank you very much for watching. Why don't you leave a like and a comment? There will be a stream link down in the comments in which I go into more detail about everything in this video. And if you love me very much, why not donate on Patreon? It enables me to make 3-hour-long streams on my second channel, Wiki 2000, every Sunday, instead of getting a job like a normal university student. And if you donate really much, I will read out your name like this: Darius the Bird, Eric Betts, Harris Hawk, V, Sandra Corvus, Attila Nemetz, Carissa, Daniel Hyman, Dominic Coroselli, Emily Marigold Klassen, Herdina, Jersey, Klastrup, Lilliscraft, Mamuka, Tsiluari, Marxism Tonight, Nane Pima, Pout, Raymond DeVille, Red Shock Trooper, Sean Murphy, Scanner Magnum Turner, Staymaster Chef, Taylor CH, and Trey.